Welcome back to Haaretz.com. I'm Aimee Amiga and I'm here with Dr. Gary Ackerman for part 2 of our conversation about counter-terrorism measures against Islamic State. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Gary Ackerman.
It's very good to be here, Amy.
The Obama administration is seeking to build a global coalition of countries to tackle Islamic State. Now, do you think Israel, with its experience in counter-terrorism, should also join that coalition?
While Israel undoubtedly has some of the greatest experience in counterterrorism out of any country, I think this is one conflict they should stay out of. First of all, Israel, I think, should not be distracted from very real threats that it has much closer to home, as demonstrated over the summer. But I also think that the main idea behind the coalition that the United States is trying to build is to actually involve Muslim states, so that the coalition is not perceived as Western countries, the Judeo-Christian world against the Muslim world, but is rather perceived as a global coalition, including parts of the Arab and Muslim world that are against ISIS, which is a deviant group within the Islamic world.
What role could those Muslim countries play?
I think the Muslim countries have some responsibility to play a role. It is their region after all. However, the geopolitics of the region might complicate who gets involved and on the ground in terms of actual fighting. So, even if the Muslim countries were to have a rhetorical role, just to basically support the coalition rhetorically and maybe provide some training, as Saudi Arabia has agreed to do, I think that would go a long way to reinforcing the idea that the coalition is a real global coalition.
Speaking of Saudi Arabia, there's quite a contradiction in having Saudi Arabia now be part of the coalition to train fighters against Islamic State. After all, it is quite known that Saudi Arabia finances terrorism, and actually some have even suggested that Saudi Arabia even financed Islamic State in its early stages. So why now would it then come in against the group?
That is actually a very good question, because this is quite a complicated situation. I like to think of Saudi Arabia as somewhat schizophrenic, in that there are elements within the Saudi Arabian regime who are very anti-ISIS or very anti the jihadist elements, because they see them as a threat to their own rule, and they're actually pro-Western oriented in terms of in the region. But there's other elements within the Saudi polity which are much more sympathetic towards the Islamists, and in fact are thought to have, together with certain Qataris and certain other sort of wealthy nations in the Gulf, have actually been supplying ISIS and several of the other more extreme Islamic groups. So it is a difficult situation. I think, though, that ISIS's rapid expansion in northern Iraq, has frightened the Saudi regime into saying, we have to take a stand. And the fact that ISIS is now galvanizing some support even in Saudi Arabia. There's several Saudi, well, more than several, quite a few Saudi fighters that have gone to join ISIS. I think the Saudi government realizes that ISIS poses a more direct threat, and they really have to join the coalition to combat ISIS.
Given Iran's interest in the region, could you see it playing a role in the coalition? Could we see a situation in which the US, Saudi Arabia and Iran work together?
I don't think that's possible. I think, first of all, the Saudis and the Iranians are too far apart on many issues, and there's no ways, because of all the other issues that separate them, that the United States is going to engage in a formal coalition with Iran at this stage. I think that what might be possible is a low-level tacit collaboration where there's some coordination between the coalition and Iran against, to make sure, for instance, that the coalition doesn't mistakenly bomb Iranian troops or assets in Syria, or that the Iranians might support certain elements of the Kurds, while the coalition supports other elements of the Kurds. So I think it is possible some low-level tacit collaboration, but I don't think there's going to be any overt collaboration. I think anything will be behind closed doors in secret.
President Obama has promised not to send ground troops into Iraq and Syria. Do you see a situation in which he's forced to do so?
Well, on the one hand, the Middle East is a very unpredictable place. If you had asked the administration a year ago whether they would be bombing in Syria soon, a year from then, they would have said absolutely not. So, but however, it is in the Obama administration's entire foreign policy has been centered around not putting boots on the ground in conflict zones around the world. In fact, on taking US troops back from those countries in like Iraq and Afghanistan. So this would be a 180-degree turnaround. The air strikes can be justified on the fact that they're not boots on the ground. I think it would be highly unlikely that any situation would really drag the US in. The only situation, I think, which is remotely possible of dragging US boots on the ground would be if all the other opposition on the ground, the Kurds, the Iraqi government, the Syrian government, somehow crumbled suddenly and the American government had to step in. But I think even in that situation, there'd be other measures that they would take before they would put boots on the ground.
Do you think it would encourage its allies to put their boots on the ground?
Yes, I think that before that happens, they would much rather encourage, help many of their allies to put boots on the ground long before they put American boots on the ground.
So they say, not for us, but for you guys it's okay.
Yes, yes.
I see. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Gary Ackerman.
It's been my pleasure, Aimee.
I'm Aimee Amiga and you're on Haaretz.com.